It's time for Saturday Matters, and Saturday Matters today is Lowell. And we're going back to Ukraine. And this time not in Kyiv, other places. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Maud. If you were here last week, you heard me talk a little bit about why I was in Ukraine. I want to expand on that a little bit today. I was there as a Fulbright scholar, and the Fulbright program has been in place for a number of years and operates with a number of different programs, one of which is the exchange of scholars between U.S. institutions, and others relate to providing opportunities for graduate students. The goal basically is to provide opportunities for people to develop international relationships. It has worked with foreign scientists, scholars coming to this country for positions, and Americans going to positions literally throughout the world. In addition, there are graduate student Fulbrights, where graduate students are provided with opportunities to go and do research and or other kinds of activities, both people coming here and people from the U.S. going abroad. I know that Gail Baker was a Fulbright scholar several times. You may remember Nancy York, forced into herself. She was had a graduate program. The reason I go through this again is that this week, basically, the Fulbright program has been decimated. It's hard to know what the full details are, but a number of individual scholars have had their Fulbrights revoked, and the Fulbright board, which oversees the program, resigned en masse. So it's really hard to know what's going to happen, but it's been really important. It's incredibly competitive, both in this country to go abroad and for positions in this country. It's an extensive vetting process, and it has been in the past free from political interference. The members of the board have been appointed by presidents, but basically, as of now, the whole program is in limbo. As I mentioned last week, my home institution, the Ukrainian institution, was in Kyiv, and my lectures in Kyiv included at the medical school several postgraduate programs in hospitals, both in medical genetics and pediatrics, and then a number of other presentations to faculty and other universities within the Kyiv area. My work outside of Kyiv was basically supported by Ukrainian American Birth Defects Alliance, a program developed, as I told you last week, by a geneticist at the University of South Alabama, who was Ukrainian, or is Ukrainian, and he put together a consortium of a number of medical centers in Ukraine that collaborated in the development of programs in birth defect surveillance and research. My first trip to Ukraine was to Lviv, and then 3 years later I went with the Fulbright. My activities outside of Kyiv were all supported by this program, and it provided me an opportunity to travel to the places that I'm going to talk about today with support from that program and the institutions that participated in it, who became my hosts in all the cities that I visited. So with that, let's get started. First of all, I want to point out that last week Al was disappointed that I talked about Ukrainian women. And so I decided to add a picture of a Ukrainian woman and her signature high heels just for Al's benefit.
Thank you.
Okay, now, this is what they look like when they're young. I guess Hal's not here again this week. Babushka. The scarf is babushka, but Hal has corrected me that the women are called babushkas. This woman looks really happy, and I picked that out. But most of the time, the older people, no matter where you see them, look tired, they're worn, and as I mentioned last week, it's hard to imagine what a lot of them live through. You see them selling potatoes in the metro stations. They'll have maybe 2 or 3 potatoes, a small bowl of a bag of cherries, and it's really remarkable. So I wanted to add this to point out that somehow those girls end up as babushkas. Now let's see. Okay. Now, just to orient you on where we're going to be going today. Here's Kyiv. We're going to go to Lviv, which is far west over here. You will see that spelled 3 different ways. This is the Ukrainian spelling. The Polish spelling is L-W-O-W. The Russian spelling is L-V-O-V. This was at one time, you can see how close it is to Poland. This was Poland, Polish. They still think it's Polish. And so anytime I follow a number of Facebook places or a number of sites on Facebook, and anytime somebody posts a picture of Lviv, the Poles respond, "This is Polish." It was also part of the Lithuanian Empire. We tend not to think, we don't think about Lithuanians basically controlled all this area here. Kyiv, in fact, was originally settled by Vikings, so that you've got a long and incredibly complex history. And I point that out with regard to Lviv because this is, these arguments are still going on. So here's Kyiv, here's Lviv, where we're going to go. Then I was also up here in Rivne, and this was a medical school. This was a local oblast, that means that's the equivalent of state health consortium. I then took most of my interior travel was by air, but from Rivne down to Kamenetsky here, I went by ambulance. The person who acted as my interpreter in Rivne had come up by a clinic ambulance from here, and so she and I and the driver drove down by ambulance. There's no airport there, so I went from Kamenetsky back to Kyiv by rail. I then also traveled down to Crimea, flying, and then the other place that I went is over here in the far east to Donetsk. So I want to start with Lviv. And you can see it's here in the far west of Ukraine. This has been the center of much of the pro-European activity. And it has had a long and interesting history. It's a beautiful city. You can see a typical square here. This is Rhinox Square. That means market. That's the market square. These things just jump around. Independence Square. And at one end of Independence Square is the Opera House. The first time I was there, I saw Swan Lake, which is kind of an appropriate thing to do if you're in an Eastern European country. One of on my initial trip there, that was in cooperation with the University of Health and the birth defects program there in Western Ukraine. And my tour guide was an opera singer. She was the sister of one of the people in the birth defects program, so she took us around and we actually got in to the Opera House. This is the exterior of the Opera House. You can see the characteristic architecture, the monumental sculptures on the top, and then you can see the fact that this is Ukrainian and not Polish, given the Ukrainian flags. This is the interior of the Opera House. When I showed you the Kyiv Opera House, I showed it from the point of view of the orchestra. This is looking down at the stage. You see across the top there, the bar of white lights. That's where they translate the language of the opera into Ukrainian. That didn't help me a lot. I probably did better with the Italian than I did with the Ukrainian. But anyhow, that's what that bar of lights is there. The first time I was in Lviv, this is the hotel where Susan and the kids and I stayed when we went to Lviv. This is the George Hotel. There's two really nice hotels there. This one, and this is the one where I stayed the first time I was there, the Grand Hotel. And both of these are right in the heart of the city on that large square, Independence Square. This is a monument to Shevchenko. He looks like a Greek, but he was actually a very famous Ukrainian poet, and this is in the square outside the hotel. And here in the front you can see a typical babushka. And it was interesting when I was there, the number of old men sitting around playing chess in the square, and then the women with their bags. This is the medical school where I lectured, and this was, as you can see, the physiology, anatomy, histology, and they were, my host there was a really charming guy. I had met him when I was there the first time, and then I went back to Lviv several times during the Fulbright, and just a really nice guy. This is another square, and this one is particularly interesting from the point of view, if you see the tables off to the right, that was a little pub where Susan and Jeremy and Allison and I sat and had a few beers and met a really fascinating Ukrainian guy. We probably spent an hour talking to him about his experiences with the change in Ukraine, and then in the background some legs. So, from the second place I want to talk about is really not where the Fulbright was, but this is a town to the south, down very close to the border, Kamenets-Podilsky. It's particularly interesting because of a very complex history. This was one of this area of western and southwestern Ukraine was one of the most highly contested, with various ethnic groups moving in and out. And it's particularly interesting from the perspective of these people pretty much got along together. There are estimates of anywhere from 7 to 17 ethnic groups that were all living there about at the same time, with their own governments and with their own churches, basically administrative units based on ethnicity, very similar to what were the millet system that, if you were in the Army course, you will recall, was a way of allowing different groups to maintain their identity and maintain their laws. So it has a very interesting physical location. You can see that basically there is a river that goes around here that actually to protect it, and then there is a fortress or castle here, and most of the old town is right in here. I don't have a slide of it, but I mentioned the changing predominant ethnic groups. This was taken over by the Ottomans for a very short period of time, and they took what had been an Orthodox church, and on top of the steeple, or on top of the cross, they put a crescent and a star, or a crescent, the symbol of Islam. But as I said, I do not have a picture of that, but it was a little church right down in here. Now, the fortress or the castle, this shows the town. You can see here's the river, and so the town's here, then the castle is off over here. But you can see that this was relatively well protected by the river. But in addition to the river, they had a large fortress or castle. This is referred to as the Turkish Bridge, because apparently it must have been built by the Turks. But interestingly, the castle, the fortress, was not all built at the same time. It was built over a number of years. And these square towers are Turkish or Ottoman, and the round ones are Russian. So it's a real conglomeration. I should point out that this town is considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of its importance of a place where people were able to live together and develop very interesting and unique architectures. This is just another view of the castle. We were able to pretty much wander freely through it. As I say, my host from Kalmanensky took me there along with my interpreter, and we had basically a free rein for wandering through the castle. Just another view, and you can see here one of the old Turkish towers, the remnants of it, and then the more the Russian style. In the city or in the town itself, there were various districts for the particular different ethnic groups. And they had basically defined areas where they lived and had a church. So this is the Armenian church in the Armenian district. This next one is the Church of St. Nikolai. This is an Orthodox church. And as I say, the thing that's particularly interesting about this city is the fact that these people, for a long period of time, were able to get along with each other. So the next place I want to go is to Crimea. And this was, I was there at the medical school, and it was a very interesting trip because I was at the medical school in one city, but my host took me throughout the peninsula, throughout Crimea, and gave me a chance to really see what it was like. And so the first place I want to mention is Yalta. To orient you, here's the Crimean Peninsula, and this is the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, and Yalta is down here on the south coast. Yalta is probably most famous for the fact that at the close of World War II, this was the site of major peace talks. There were 3 international conferences held by the great powers after the Great Patriotic War, World War II. The first was in Tehran, the second was in Yalta, and the third was in Potsdam. And you probably recognize the characters in front. You see Churchill, Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin. Behind are a number of important people, including George Marshall, who was responsible for the Marshall Plan. The peace talks, interestingly, did not include one of the other major Western allies, France. France was excluded because basically Roosevelt didn't like de Gaulle, and the Russians didn't like the French. And if you know your history, you may have a good understanding of why the Russians weren't terribly enamored with the French. The peace conference, most of the discussions were held at this palace. The different contingencies, the Brits, the Americans, and the Russians all had different palaces where they lived. If you're interested, there's a great book called The Daughters of Yalta that's written by, or that discusses the daughters of the various participants. Churchill's daughter, the daughter of the American ambassador to Russia, and I can't remember, I guess Stalin, must have been Stalin's daughter. Anyhow, this was the Levidian palace, was the Russian palace, where the Russian state was also the center of most of the major conferences. This is the conference room in the Levidian palace. When I was there, you could look in the windows, but the palace was not open to tourists. This is another conference room, and I simply include this because it shows the flags of the participating nations, Russia, the U.S., and Great Britain, and then the participants, the negotiators at the table. I mean, in the photograph behind. The main focus of this conference was for the Allies who won the war or were winning the war to figure out what to do with Poland. Poland was the major topic of discussion because they knew that it was going to be taken over, and then the question was, well, who was going to control it? And I think Russia won. A very interesting cathedral there in Yalta. This is the Nevsky Cathedral, and just some your typical ornate Orthodox architecture. Yalta is also a seaside town. It's on the Black Sea, and you can see here the harbor with pleasure boats. People walking on the promenade. It's really a lovely city. It used to be a place where Soviet officials went for their holiday on the Black Sea. So a second interesting place in Crimea was a town called Bakhchisarai. And Bakhchisarai, I'll show you on the map. Here's Yalta. Here is Bakhchisarai. Here, this is the capital of Crimea. This is Simferopol. That's where the medical school was. That's where I lectured. Nothing terribly interesting there. I had a great time. I might point out that my hosts in Ukraine, most of them spoke English. Some of them didn't, and I always had usually a local person who spoke English and Ukrainian or Russian, as the case would be, who acted as my interpreter. As I pointed out last time, all my presentations in PowerPoint had been translated into Ukrainian. So I lectured in English, had the Ukrainian PowerPoint, and then a translator or an interpreter who would translate my English into the local language, Ukrainian. Usually, I stayed in a hospital or a medical school facility where they had rooms rooms in the broadest sense for visiting faculty or visiting dignitaries, some of which were better than others. But the people were really hospitable. I was well taken care of by my hosts everywhere I went in Ukraine. As I said, most of them spoke English. A couple of them did not. But I always, even though I struggled with language, I had somebody that would help me out. So anyhow, back to Bakhchisarai. Bakhchisarai was interesting because it was actually a Tartar, the capital of a Tartar Khanate. And you can see the map in 1939, the percentage of the population that was Tartar. They continued in Crimea, or at that time they continued to have 3 official languages: Ukrainian, Russian, and Tartar. The Tartar were an Islamic Muslim minority group, and among Stalin's other attempts at wiping out people, he felt that the Tartars were Nazi collaborators. A few of them were, but the majority were not. And so basically he shipped all the Tartars over a period of about 3 days, shipped all the Tartars out of Crimea. They went, if you look at the map, those dots along the top, those are all prison camps, those are all gulags. You can see a small percentage went there. The majority were moved to Uzbekistan, and then a smaller percentage to Kazakhstan. So most of those people, you can see the numbers up there if it matters, were sent not to the gulags, not to the prison camps, but to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Then once Crimea has an interesting history. It was basically autonomous, and then Khrushchev gave it to Ukraine. And that's why Putin claims that it's Russian. It was a mistake that it was given to Ukraine. And so it became really the first target of Putin's attempt to take over Ukraine. He took over Crimea. Well, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Tartars were allowed to return to Crimea. And you can see that this is the distribution where the populations are over time after their return. So Bakhchisarai is right down here. Now I mentioned this is a view, a contemporary view of the town, the center of the town, and you can see the minaret there for a mosque. This had been Islamic. This is the Khan's palace with the mosque and the minarets. The Khan basically, this was an autonomous Khanate. That's an administrative and organizational unit that you see throughout much of the Islamic world. There were Khanates in Kyiv, a number of places in Central Asia, where you've got basically a leader, a potentate, who represents both the state and the religion. So this is his palace in Bakhchisarai. Another view of the palace, the interior, very ornate, typical. And then another one, you can see the very large carpet there. Just as a cultural aside, what you see here are furnaces. Those are braziers, where they burn charcoal, and these are basically to heat the house. This one here, I'm smaller, but this big one, you can see it's got a pan underneath it to catch the ashes. And this is a typical way of heating homes in the Middle East and Crimea. Well, another interesting place in Crimea is the city of Sevastopol. And Sevastopol really never was part of Ukraine. It's down here in the lower lower southwest corner. And basically, Sevastopol was always controlled, even when Ukraine was given back, or given when Crimea was given to Ukraine, it remained Russian. And it was the home of the Russian fleet. This was the Russians' warm water port. And if you recall the history, a lot of what was going on with the wars in this part of the world were Russia's desire to have access to the Mediterranean or to have a warm water port, because the ports in the north aren't that useful, if you will, in the winter. This is a view of the Sevastopol harbor, and here's a view of an interesting building along the waterfront. At one time, this city was entirely off limits to non-military personnel. The only people who lived and entered Sevastopol were military and their families, so that it was basically a closed city for the Russian Navy. Here you can see in the harbor, you can see the dry dock there in the foreground. But what struck me most about Sevastopol was the Russian warships. When I was there, this was in 2005, it was no longer closed, but it was still the Russian Navy's warm water port. And the port is basically filled with warships. It kind of reminds me of when you go north of San Francisco, across the bay, the mothballed ships there. Is it Richmond? Richmond? Yeah. Anyhow, these are not mothballed. These are active ships, and sometimes they go out on maneuvers. So they continue to maintain, the Russians continue to maintain this, their military presence in Crimea, even before they invaded and took it over in 2014. The last place I want to talk about is Donetsk. Donetsk is in the far east. You can see it's marked there, north of the Sea of Azov, Crimea down below. And Donetsk is, and at the time I was there, a strong Russian influence, to put it mildly. As I mentioned, all of my overhead, or my slides, had been translated in Ukrainian, which in Donetsk was absolutely meaningless, because they did not speak Ukrainian, they spoke Russian. My interpreter, who was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, told me, we're not Ukrainians, we're Russians. And that foreshadowed what was to come later. Again, here I was at the medical school. This was the one place where I think the only place where my host basically spoke no English. And so I relied very heavily on some of his students. All the places that I was going outside of Kyiv was postgraduate medical education, so that I was lecturing to doctors and faculty people. And a couple of his students, postdoctoral students, served as my interpreters. Well, one of the things that you don't see that much, or didn't see that much in Ukraine when I was there, were statues of Lenin, but that still had a very large and proud one. One of the other things that they have, that most Ukrainian cities have, is a monument to the Great Patriotic War, that is to World War II, and the valor of the Russian served troops in opposition to the Germans. This is the Cathedral of Donetsk. your typical Orthodox cathedral. And when I went to Donetsk, I flew. I flew into Donetsk airport because it was a long way from Kyiv. So this is the Donetsk airport. This is the Donetsk airport. After I was there, as you can tell, another picture of the Donetsk airport. And this is a clinic building where I stayed. This is after the Russian takeover. The politics of this are quite complicated, but basically, if you look at this map, you'll see that in pink are 3 areas which basically became Russian. Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. The Russian attempt, and Hal has talked about this a lot, and I'm not going to try to recapitulate what he says because he's much more informed about this from a reporter's point of view, but from my point of view, being kind of boots on the ground. All of these areas, all 3 of these areas, have strong Russian ties. They were not settled by Ukrainians. They were settled by Russians. Russia becomes the language of choice, and I think that if such were possible, I think that if an election were held, these areas would choose to go with Russia, but I also think that applies to these areas as well. So basically what you've got here, the southern part of Ukraine, are populations that are predominantly Russian and have much more allegiance to Russia from a political perspective than they do to Ukraine. I'm going to venture a political opinion. And that is what should have happened was Ukraine should have said to Luhansk and Donetsk, okay, you go with Russia. We will no longer be part of Ukraine. That didn't happen. And as you know, the Russians now control much of this area. They're attacking over here in the Donetsk. And who knows what's going to come of this. The one thing you can be sure of, that Trump did not succeed in ending the war in a day. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks a lot. And I'll be pleased to try to answer any questions anybody has.
I think I might know the answer to this, but so that in eastern Ukraine, there's a very strong sense of Russian identity. When you go to the central and western part of Ukraine, do you get the same very strong patriotic Ukrainian feel?
The answer is yes. And it's interesting because literally I spent a week in Lviv, flew back to Kyiv, put new underwear on my suitcase, and flew to Donetsk. This was in 2005. It was like 2 different worlds. And that has only become exacerbated. Kyiv in the middle is a little more mixed. But clear, the major pro-European influence has come from the west, from Lviv, and the major Russian alliance is there in the east, in Donetsk and Luhansk. And it's a country divided. The problem is that the Dnieper River, which would be a logical dividing place, goes through the heart of Kyiv. And so you can't divide it along a river like the Danube forms the river or the border between Serbia and Romania and Bulgaria. Anybody else? Yeah, Don.
Do they use the Cyrillic alphabet throughout the country, including the western portions?
The answer, the question is, do they use the Cyrillic alphabet? Yes, Ukrainian is written in Cyrillic. And there are some subtle differences. There are a couple of additional letters in the Ukrainian Cyrillic alphabet compared to the Russian, but basically it's Cyrillic. Yeah. And when I was there, I could pronounce all the things. I can't do that anymore. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to back off from Ukraine specifically. What is the origins and the funding for the Fulbright program?
That's great. Good question. The origin that came from William Fulbright, who was a senator from Arkansas. That's its name for him. The funding comes from the U.S. State Department. It's part of the State Department budget.
So it is U.S. government funded?
U.S. government funded. Although, when you're abroad, then your host institution picks up your expenses. But my salary, if you will, and my stipend for my flat came from the U.S. But in other cases, I think Pat's got an answer to this. Let Pat answer that. She's all excited about it.
In the early days, the money that was spent on Fulbright scholars going abroad, say to England, was money that England owed to the United States because of the war. And so this was a way of not punishing the countries when they needed to repay money. But it also was a benefit to us because then they educated Americans abroad.
Yeah, I'm trying. What was the name of those funds? Because most of the countries in the world had basically owed us money, and this was a way that they paid it back. There was a special name for it. Yeah. But now, as I say, it's my travel when I was in Ukraine was funded by this Ukrainian American Birth Defects Program. They handled all my travel, my internal travel. A good question, but basically, I can't remember the numbers that have been kicked around this last week, but basically the State Department funds the program, and President Trump says, no, it's not in line with my Make America Great Again.
Do you know anything about the situation in Odessa?
No.
Okay.
I don't think it's certainly not part of the war zone. It was also predominantly Russian, and it is not. Well, we'll try to reconstruct the map. Odessa is in the far southwest corner of Ukraine, basically next to Bulgaria, Moldova. And as far as I know, there are no boots on the ground there. There may be drone attacks, maybe missile attacks. I didn't go into the fact that there is now a bridge between Kursk in Russia and Crimea that the Ukrainians keep trying to blow up, but the Russians built a bridge there. But I don't know about Odessa, because I think to me, well, I just don't know. I didn't go to Odessa. Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Okay, thank you.
Next week is very keen.
Thank you.